everyone, I'm Claire. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be kicking off a new series where horror novels from the last 4 years are going to go head to head in a horror showdown. Big disclaimer at the start of this little mini series. A lot of the criteria that I'm using are going to be extremely subjective. I mean, my rating at the end is extremely subjective, obviously, but outside of my rating and my opinions of the book, it's also not the case that a tiny little sample of horror novels that came out or were published in a given year are representative of the entire year overall. So that is a huge disclaimer. When I take the 3 books from each year that I'm going to take, those 3 books are not necessarily the best or the most representative horror from that year. It's just that they fit certain criteria, and together as a collection of 3 books work for the purposes of what I'm trying to do. Essentially, I have collated 3 books from 2022, 3 books from 2023, so on and so forth, all the way to 2025. And each video is going to be focused on 1 year. This video will be 2022 horror novels. I'll be reading those books and giving you my thoughts on them. But the kind of caveat there, the change that I'm making outside of just giving you my thoughts, is that these books were picked for very specific reasons. Together as a whole, they have to fit certain criteria in terms of number of ratings, average rating, length of book, and one of the books must be a novella. So obviously there are many books each year to pick from, but these books that have been picked are because they fit those categories or they adhere to those rules. That's just my way of making it like a little bit more fair and me trying to stabilize the playing field a little bit. Obviously these videos are just for fun. At the end, I'm going to have a winner, a year that won for me personally, that I think has the best horror based on these criteria. Let's get into specifics really quick. Together, the 3 books have to have, sorry, I'm reading notes from my iPad. Together, the books have to have average yearly ratings between 3.7 and 3.8. Average number of ratings must be between 20,000 and 25,000. The average length must be between 250 and 300 pages, and at least 1 novella per year, so less than 200 pages of content is what I'm using to define that. Quick note, I really challenge myself to find books that aren't mentioned super frequently on social media or on the internet in general, but that proved pretty difficult. I wanted to keep the number of ratings high because I figured those books would be most representative of the horror that came out that year. Now, obviously, books that aren't super talked about that have a lower number of average ratings would have worked too, but I really wanted to create standard, it just got really dark, standard rules and guidelines that I could adhere to across every single video. So that proved easiest when I picked a large number of average ratings, if that makes sense. As I said, we'll be starting with 2022 in this video, and the 3 books that I'll be reading are Heche Puello's But Not Too Bold, which I think the English version only came out this year, but it was originally published in 2022. That will be representing the novella for this video. The second and third books are Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison and Nat Cassidy's Mary. The stats on these 3 books are the average Goodreads rating is 3.8. The number of ratings, average number of ratings is 21,969. The average length is 285 pages. And obviously after I read each of these 3 books, I will be giving you my rating, and then my average rating at the end across all 3 books will be kind of the score of the video, and that will be the number that I use to compare each year. Let's get into the first book, which is, as I said, Heche Puello's But Not Too Bold. Alright, so I finished But Not Too Bold by Heche Puello. I figured I'd start out by reading the blurb for the book because I think it's pretty accurate and it would probably do a much better job at describing the book than I would. The Shape of Water meets Mexican Gothic in this sapphic monster romance novella wrapped in Gothic fantasy trappings. The old keeper of the keys is dead, and the creature who ate her is the volatile lady of the capricious house, Anatema, an enormous humanoid spider with a taste for laudanum and human brides. Dahlia, the old keeper's protege, must take up her duties, locking and unlocking the little drawers in which Anatema keeps her memories. And if she can unravel the crime that led to her predecessor's execution, Dahlia might just be able to survive long enough to grow into her new role. But there's a gaping hole in Dahlia's plan that she refuses to see. Anatoma cannot resist a beautiful woman, and she eventually devours every single bride that crosses her path. I think this was fine. I think it was okay. I feel like I don't have a lot to say about it because it was a little lackluster for me, I think. I really liked the writing, so I'm definitely gonna try and pick up more from this author in the future. I think the horror elements were really nicely written. The descriptions are super vivid. I had a good idea of what the house looked like. I had a good idea of what the monster looked like. The action sequence that there is towards the end of the book was also really well written, so I enjoyed that. But I finished it and it left me feeling kind of like, okay. I didn't really care about Dahlia. I didn't really care about Dahlia's friends or the people she works with that she frequently communicates with inside this house. I didn't feel much towards Anatoma, the monster. I wasn't convinced that this was a romance. I think maybe from the monster's side, I could maybe see it, but from Dahlia's side, I could not see it whatsoever. I mean, maybe that's just me, but it was not convincing as a romance. I'm just really not somebody who likes horror novellas. I just don't think there's enough time to complete the amount of world building and description that I would like, and I do normally like out of a horror novel. So I think if you're somebody who usually really enjoys short horror and horror novellas, horror short stories, I think you definitely like this. It felt more like 30 pages than 115, honestly. It felt more like a short story. We are figuring out that a crime has taken place, and in the next couple of chapters we know who's committed the crime. So it's pretty quick. It reads really quickly. If that's something that you usually go for, especially in horror, I would definitely pick it up. The writing's really good. I think the story is interesting enough. But in terms of, is this memorable? Was this something that I was like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting the reveal. I was very convinced by this monster human romance, which I think was supposed to be the point of the book. Was I really, really interested in the characters and what was going to happen with them? The answer to all of those is no. So I think, yeah, I don't think it was for me. I think I'm probably gonna say it's like a 3.25 for me. Again, I don't really have anything necessarily bad to say about it. And I didn't have a bad time reading it. I don't know, it was just meh. Time jumping a little bit here, post haircut, and I have already finished Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. I meant to check in about halfway through the book, but over the last week and a half I've been pretty sick, so I figured I would just wait and give you all my thoughts wrapped up into one clip. This was not great for me. I am giving this a 2.5 star rating, I think. I didn't really like it all that much. I had a few issues with it, which I will get into, but because this is the first time that I'm talking about it in the video, I just want to give a quick overview of the plot. We're following Rory, who has returned to her small town from New York City, where she usually lives and works, at the request of her twin sister Harper, who is pregnant and wanting Rory to be there for her as she's going through this pregnancy. One day, and in fact right at the beginning of the book, Rory is leaving from a night out in this small town, and in her car while she's driving, she runs into a very large animal and gets into this accident where she gets out of her car. She sees that there's this giant dent in her car, and she realizes that she's hit a very large animal. It's pretty clear early on that she has hit a werewolf, and in the following couple of pages, she is attacked by this werewolf, and subsequently we can guess has started becoming and turning into a werewolf. That's pretty much the plot. The rest of the book is Rory's relationship and communications with different characters, such as her sister Harper, her mother, this love interest from her childhood named Ian, some friends, just a bunch of people that she either has a prior relationship with or this new relationship with that she's reconnecting with during this time that she's living back home. I understand where this book is going with this idea of rebirth and change and fixing past wrongs and communicating with people that in the past we maybe didn't have a great relationship, that kind of thing, repair and rebirth, like I said. I understand that. I just don't think the book did it very well. And I think getting into my specific issues with the characters and with the story, I think the characters are funny that I'm saying this because I felt this way about the last book as well. They're just not convincing. Like, I'm not convinced that Rory's relationship with this childhood love interest Ian is legit, is genuine. I don't really find chemistry between them as characters. I feel the same way about Rory and her sister Harper. I think we're led to believe that they're this really close pair of twins. I find that there are a lot of problems with the way that Harper is written to have behaved in the past, and I think Rory is written to overlook those in Harper but not in other people, which I have a problem with because I think that makes Harper quite flat, even when the writing is attempting to make Rory as a character make Harper more dynamic, and I don't think that's working out as it was intended in the book. And I think that was my biggest problem with this book, is that I just didn't care. I didn't care about the werewolf transformation. I didn't care about figuring out who the werewolf is. And that's kind of the big mystery of the book, is figuring out who bit her and who the werewolf is, and I just didn't care. If we got to the end of the book and we didn't figure out who the werewolf was, I would just think, okay, that's fine. That's pretty much it. I think 2.5 is probably what I'm gonna stay at. It reminds me a lot of Hungerstone, which I read earlier this year by Kat Dunn. It's a Carmilla retelling of sorts, and I felt none of the vampiric or, woman scorned, woman hungry type of elements. It just felt really flat to me, and I think that's exactly how I would describe this. It was just flat. I'm about 65% of the way through the audiobook for Mary, and I'm having so much fun with it. I'm liking it a lot more than the other two, so let's talk about it. I don't want to give away too much about the plot of this, so I guess I'll just give you a quick little overview. Mary is a middle-aged woman who is struggling financially and with doctor dismissal of certain symptoms, such as hallucinations, auditory and visual hallucinations, and hot flashes, certain things like that. Obviously, she's being dismissed and told that she has menopause, but we know as the reader and through Mary that something else, maybe more sinister, is going on. Mary is asked by a family member, an old sick family member, to come back to her hometown and take care of her. She reluctantly agrees because she has a troubled past with this family member, but she goes anyway. And I'm at the point in the book where for the past maybe 40% of it, she has been settling into this hometown. She's uncovering certain memories. She's experiencing stronger and more frequent hallucinations now that she's back. She's seeing some pretty horrific things, ghosts potentially. She's learning about the serial killer that died on her birthday when she was born. And all of this is kind of culminating into this bigger picture that's building, that is related to maybe cult behavior, religious fanaticism. It's getting to a point where she needs to figure out what's going on, and she needs to figure out how she's involved and why she's seeing the things that she's seeing. I won't go much further than that, but I will say that I know a lot of people that I've seen comment on the length of this book as one thing that they don't like about it, and two, the other thing being that the social commentary is a little bit heavy-handed. And I think in terms of the length, I think I agree. I think some aspects of it are really drawn out, but I will say in audiobook format, I don't feel that way at all. I think the narrator makes Mary so hilarious, and I can't imagine that I would find it as funny reading it physically, so I'm really glad that I'm reading it in audiobook format. In terms of the commentary, I don't think it's heavy-handed. I think it's a little on the nose, which I normally don't mind in books actually, because I think not all readers are created equal, and I think certain issues are more known to certain readers than others. I think this experience that women and middle-aged women have specifically might not be known by everyone. So having that commentary be a little on the nose makes it, it gives it broader applicability and appeal to wider audiences. Okay, my camera died at the end of that clip, but I ended up finishing Mary, got through the last 35% or so of the audiobook, and I loved it. I think it's gonna be a 4.5 for me. There's not much else I can say about the plot or anything that happens outside of what I said in the last clip, because I think this is one of those books where, at least for me, I didn't really get a good idea of what it was gonna be about or be like based on the blurb or, you know, what I've heard about it. So I went in, you know, partially blind, and I think that made it a lot more fun. So I'm not really gonna say anything about the plot for the last 30%, except that it gets crazy. It gets a little fever dream-like, and kind of goes off the rails a little bit, especially with Mary and this town and everyone in this town and the key players in the book. The horror elements are top-notch, so good. I think sometimes when you're listening to an audiobook, at least for me, it's hard for me to get scared or for the suspense to really hit. And I think with this, it really did, because not only is the narration fantastic, but the way that Mary's written, like I said in the last clip, she's very quick to anger and agitate, and she's very over the top sometimes about things. So that comes off really well in terms of that suspense, despite the fact that it's in an audiobook format. I think the reason it doesn't feel like a 5-star book to me is because I do think it goes on a little too long. I think this book could have been not 100 pages shorter, but at least 50, maybe 100. I don't know. I feel like it could have been shorter, and I feel like the major plot points and the commentary that the author was making would have hit a little harder if that were the case. Anyway, I won't really speak much about it because I have already spoken so much about it in the last clip, but I loved it and I had a lot of fun, and you know, it was nice finishing up this video on a book that I really, really enjoyed. That about wraps up the reading and reviewing part of this video. I just wanted to quickly go over my ratings for each book and compare that to the book's Goodreads rating. Referencing my notes for this part of the video, the first book, But Not Too Bold by Hache Puello, has a Goodreads rating as of September 2025 of 3.79 with about 1,900 ratings, which is not very much actually in terms of the number of ratings. My rating, just as a reminder, was 3.25, so not too far off, but definitely lower. The second book, Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison, the average rating on Goodreads is 3.84 with about 26,000 ratings, so quite a bit of people. My rating was 2.5, so quite a bit lower. I think I could see why a lot of people would like this book, because I would say it's more light on horror. It's very geared towards the relationships between the characters in the book, not necessarily on suspense or horror elements, classical horror elements. So I think it's probably more applicable to a broad audience, and that would make sense why it has a 3.84. Third book, Mary by Nat Cassidy, which I gave a 4.5, has a 3.77, the lowest actually of the three books on Goodreads, and that's for about 38,000 ratings. Across the three books, the average rating, like I said at the beginning of the video, I believe is 3.8 exactly, and my average rating across the three books is 3.42. Again, not too far off. 0.4 is not really anything to write home about. Comparing, you know, 2022 horror to 2023, 2024, 2025, this might be one of the lower years because it is pretty unlike me to rate a book a 2.5. Yeah, I'm excited to see how this kind of develops as I go through all the other years. So far, I'm having a lot of fun. These are three books that I probably would have eventually tried to read, but they weren't really on my like immediate radar for horror reading or anything like that. If I were to give out a few superlatives, I would say Mary is definitely the best like classical horror. I think there are some frightening elements in there, some really good suspense, some crazy action sequences that I think fit the kind of horror that I usually think of. And I think not that breaking that mold is a bad thing or that keeping that mold is a good thing, it's more just obvious horror to me. But I think if I were to say the most unique book, it wouldn't be Mary. It would definitely be But Not Too Bold. I haven't really read anything like that. I think the writing style was very interesting. The lack of details. I mean, obviously that's associated with novellas anyway, but sometimes novellas can be very detailed and very fleshed out. But I think the story was very unique and very novel, and I am excited to see what Heche Puyo comes up with next. Anyway, that about wraps up the video. Again, I'm really excited to continue this and see what happens in the next few years. If you have any suggestions for horror from 2022, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to build up my knowledge, my repertoire of horror a little bit more, so I'd love to hear about that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.